In a previous video, we followed along with the setup instructions for WordPress on a Unix Antlet, on a Debian Jesse Antlet. Followed along, and, went along with this video, and we set it up. And as I moved further into testing, I realized that there was issues with that install that ultimately, I honestly never resolved. And so I did some research on the web and poked around and came across this linuxserve.com website. There was an article from 2015 on installing the latest WordPress version, which actually turned out to be really invaluable. So I've gone from that and a couple other things, and I've created a script or a process that should get a working Antlet up running WordPress. I've tested this and it worked fine. I'm going to go through all the steps here in this video, and hopefully it'll go well. So let's go ahead and go through the steps to get WordPress set up on the Antlet. So the first thing I need to do is create an Antlet for it to run on. We're going to call it Test WordPress. It's a Debian LXC Antlet. I'm going to give it this IP address of 10.1.1.14 simply because I have an external domain, and the Antsle is already set up for that domain to come through to this IP address. Let's go ahead and create the Antlet, and there is 10.1.1.14. Let's start it. It should be started. Let's go ahead and remote shell to it. So 14, yes. It's a fresh install. We need to accept that. It's got the default root password of Antsle. I want to immediately change that password. Always change your password when you stand up a new Antlet just to help secure your system. That should always be the first thing you do. And then I'm going to do an apt-get update that will update the install of Debian. You always need to keep your Debian updated. One of the issues I ran into as I was going through the process for this is I was trying to download, I believe, some PHP components, and I kept getting these bizarre error messages and they wouldn't install, and I finally realized I hadn't updated Debian, and as soon as I updated it, the installs went fine. So keep your system updated. I have a text file prepared here that kind of goes through the steps. We've set up the new Antlet. We've shelled to it. We've updated the password. Now we want to go ahead and install the LAMP stack. We've already got the L piece built. That's the Linux server. So let's go ahead and install Apache 2. As it cranks away here, downloading and installing all these packages. Some of these steps take a bit, obviously. It's getting close. And there it is. Let's get MySQL installed. MySQL is used behind WordPress for the data store. Required component. We need to give it a password. This is the master password for the system administrator or root account on the install. Definitely remember that password. It's continuing the process, and we have MySQL installed. We need to get all of the PHP components. Yes, I want to install this. And it'll walk through here. Always keep an eye on the information on the screen as it scrolls by, looking for things that, error messages. The error messages I got before I updated before were it came back with bad URLs, couldn't find URL. We've got all the PHP components we need installed. Let's go ahead and install the MySQL client. It's there. We're going to need wget to download the WordPress install package from the WordPress site. And since I'm going to go ahead and download the zip version, I need unzip on the system. You could also download the tar gz and use the tar command to unzip it. You're going to need a text editor. You could use Vi. I'm going to go ahead and install Nano on here as my text editor. And at this point, we've got all of the pieces installed we're going to need. I'm going to go ahead at this point, and we'll go back around to my Antsle, and I'm going to stop the server there. I should have actually logged out over here and forgot. And with it stopped, I'm going to go ahead and create a snapshot of it. Oops. This is a really useful feature to be able to actually capture a snapshot of the system. This way, if I make a mistake downstream, I can restore to this snapshot and continue the process without having to start completely over. So, of course, the connection was refused because we stopped the Antsle running. So let me get back on the Antsle. We're there. So we've now got a good snapshot. The next thing we need to do is create a database for WordPress. So we're going to start up, or we're going to log into MySQL. The user is root, and the password is that password we created before that I mentioned we needed to keep track of. We're in MySQL. We want to create a database that MySQL, or that WordPress will use. We have a database created. We want to create a user. In this case, I'm using password as the password just for this demonstration. And the user is WP user. On the local box, we've created the user. We need to permission the user to be able to do actual work in the database. We're going to grant all privileges. We're going to flush those privileges. That way they've actually been set for the user. And then we can exit. So we have the database set up. Now we want to actually restart a couple of services. Technically, I don't need to restart Apache 2 here because I restarted the Antsle, but I'll go ahead and do it anyhow. And it's safest to go in and restart MySQL just because we've made changes to it. So we've got those pieces set up. Now I want to go ahead and download WordPress and install it. We're going to go to the temp folder. For this, we're going to use wget that we installed earlier to download the latest .zip install package from WordPress, and there we have it. I'm going to unzip this file, and I'm going to unzip it to the var www folder, and we'll take a look at that in a second. And it's unzipped. Let's now get into the folder we unzipped this to. Actually, I want a CD there. We've got the default HTML folder. That is the PHP install. We could actually go look at that. Why don't we do that now? And we have the WordPress folder that we just unzipped to. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at the default there. So it is my, hopefully I've got one in here. We're actually going to go to my Antsle 14. And what we should get at this point is the Apache Debian default page. So when we installed Apache 2, this page was installed. The content for that page is sitting in the HTML folder here. And we've, like I said, unzipped WordPress here. So I'm going to do a couple of things here. I'm going to take that default HTML folder and I'm going to move it out of the way. It's now renamed. And I'm going to rename the WordPress folder to HTML. And what this now has done is the WordPress site is now the default website on this server. We need to deal with some ownership and permission issues here. So here we are changing the ownership of the WordPress folder that we renamed to HTML. So we have the proper ownership. Set some permissions. We need to create a folder on it called WP Content Uploads. And we want to change ownership again on that Uploads folder we just created. And we're there. We have laid down all the various pieces we need, set the various permissions, created the database. Let's get into that HTML folder now. Because we're doing a manual install here, we need to create a WP config PHP file. So I'm going to copy the sample one that was installed when I unzipped to my main config. I'm going to edit it. We need to change a few things in this PHP file. The first thing we need to do is tell it the name of the database and MySQL we used. And if we scroll up here, that database is named WP Database. Typing in the wrong window. WP Database. The username that we created was WP User. Username goes here. Oh, I want to click in there. I'm still getting used to a flat text editor. Eventually I'll get a GUI installed on some of these and start to use a little more sophisticated tool set. Oops, the password we used was password. Kind of stupid there, deleting it and retyping it back. So we've given it the WP database, we've given it the name of the user, WP user, and the password we created WP user with. I want to write that file out. I want to exit here. And at this point, we're pretty much done. We have set everything up. We've installed everything. If we now go back to my local Antsle 14, let it resolve here for a second. There it is. We have the WordPress installer for getting everything set up. I am going to go ahead and actually do the installation through my domain, shadowtron.org. Shadowtron.org is the domain that I have the A record set up to come through the Antsle. And I go lay down. Sorry about that, the clicking toenails. The shadowtron.org domain is set up to come through the Antsle to this Antlet. The A record was modified, and we looked at this before. And there's a configuration that's been made to get to this Antlet. So we're on my shadowtron.org site. We're going to configure it as English. Again, apologies for the dog. My super cool blog. I'm going to create a user here. We're going to give them a password. This will be a very weak password because, again, we're just demonstrating. Your username doesn't need to be root. It could be, whatever you wanted it to be. It's going to want an email. I'll give it my email here. We're going to discourage, and let's go ahead and install WordPress. And it's done its configuration in the background. And I have a WordPress site set up. So let's take a look at it as default. So let me get logged out here. If we now just come back to shadowtron.org, because we're installed, we should now get my super cool blog. There it is. We've got all kinds of good stuff here. Let's log into the blog again. Create a post, add a new post. So we've got a post, we'll add another one. Oops. Would help if I could actually type things correctly. And we have a second. Let's go ahead and publish that. If we look at our posts, that was published, all posts. We should have the two entries I just created. Let's go ahead and log out again and come back just to the public facing site. My super cool blog. Here's a couple of posts. I'm here too. Here's the I'm here, so am I. So at this point we've stood up WordPress. Those steps have worked. We have a functional site, which is pretty cool. So I hope this was useful. I hope the steps here were useful to you. Hopefully you were able to follow along and capture everything typed here. When I get this site when I get my external WordPress site finally moved onto the local server here, I will get a blog entry up that captures all these commands as well. So anyhow, I hope you enjoyed this short video. Like I said before, I hope it was useful. And we'll talk later. So I thought I'd wrap the video up by kind of doing a walk through the commands we used here. I've zoomed these into these, hopefully to make them a little bit easier to follow along in the video. We stood up a new Antsle using the Antsle interface. We secure shelled to that new Antsle. Became super user, although we technically already were. We changed the password for the root login. We updated the Debian install. We then installed the components to turn it into a LAMP server, a Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP server. So we went ahead and installed Apache, installed the MySQL server database engine. We installed various PHP components. This one here is the PHP connector, so it can talk to MySQL. We installed the MySQL client. We installed wget. Wget is used to download WordPress builds. And I went ahead and installed unzip so I can deal with zip files. We installed Nano, or I did. Nano is a text editor. You could use Vi, you could use gedit, or whatever your favorite text editor is. At this point, the LAMP setup was done, and I had an editor in place. We then went into the MySQL interface, logged in as root, and the password that was defined. When we did this install here, part of the install steps was it prompted us for the root password. It asked for that password twice. So we issue this command, and when we hit return, it'll ask us for that password. Entered that password and got in. We created a database named WP Database to hold the WordPress data. We created a user named WP User with this password. In this case, I used the word password as the password. This should be a secure password for your install. We granted all database privileges on that database to this user here that we created up here. We flushed the privileges so they were active in MySQL, and we exited back to the SSH command line. You need to restart Apache and MySQL at this point to pick up all the configuration changes and everything we've done above. There's of course a typo there. MySQL is configured at this point. We went into the temp folder on the Antsle. The wget-c downloads this zip file from the WordPress org onto your machine. I unzipped that zip file to the var www root. That created a folder underneath var www named WordPress. We went to that folder. There was the default HTML folder that Debian had in place there. I renamed that out of the way, and I renamed the WordPress folder that got created in the unzip up here to HTML, and that made the WordPress system the default website on the system. There's various permissions that need to get set on this HTML folder that we renamed WordPress to the HTML folder. These permissions are dealing with the content inside of the WordPress folder that got named to HTML. I hope that makes sense. We're giving various permissions. On the folder, we need to create a WordPress content uploads folder that gets used by various, well, it's an uploads folder. Content gets moved up into there. Some of the plugins use this folder. We also changed the ownership on it to give it to the www data. We went into the now WordPress storage folder. We needed to configure or create a configuration file for WordPress. This is the WordPress config file. So we copied their example one to the WordPress config. I used Nano to edit it. Inside of that text file, we needed to change the database name, the database user, and the password. Save this out, and then came back around to what we just installed. And again, we looked at this a minute ago. We have that installation. You saw me create a couple of blog posts. You can go to the next blog post. I'm here too, or the previous blog post. Indications are to me that we have a functional WordPress install here. If we go into the WordPress admin screen, we'll get the login. I used the word password in this case for that, and we get to our administration screen here. It looks like we have an update available for the WordPress software. Let's go ahead and install that update. WordPress will go out to the WordPress site. It'll download the installation and install it, and it's done that. We've just updated our WordPress install. We get a couple of default plugins here. The Askomet, I'm not sure I'm saying it right, is a great way to protect, as it says, your blog from spam. I've been running this on my shadowtron.com blog, hosted up on GoDaddy. This has worked well. I've had a number of messages that appeared to be spam, that it's flagged and they were spam. We have, of course, the root user that we're doing all of the administration work through. Various tools on the system. Of course, if you've worked with WordPress, you know about these, all the settings, etc. If there were comments, we could, of course, approve the comments, etc. here, or unapprove. We have just the default set of pages. We have, of course, the place to enter media. Again, if you've worked with WordPress, you can drag media in here and have it added to the media library in WordPress. A couple of posts I added here on top of the default post. I've spent some time poking around through these, everything menu-wise here, and everything seems to work okay. So, I think the end result here is we've got a functional WordPress installation. I hope you found this recap useful. And hopefully the text is big enough here you can follow along. I will get this text up on my blog site at some point here, maybe today. Make it a little easier to follow along. Hopefully this at least becomes a reference you can use. And hopefully the steps make some sense. A final thing in closing here is I'm going to go back to my Ant-Man. I'm going to go ahead and stop the Antlet that we just built. And just so you hear it again, I'm going to create a new snapshot. WordPress working. These snapshots are cheap. The effective size, it's capturing the delta between the running system and the previous snapshot, so they don't end up at this size on disk. They're cheap. You can see that, 355K on disk. Just didn't pick up any additional disk. Make snapshots, get used to making them. I've had to fall back several times. The snapshots works really well. Also, if you're unaware in Ant-Man, we can go in here and click auto start, and so if the Antsle server gets restarted, this Antlet will auto start. Just kind of a tip there. Anyhow, hope there was some, like I said before, valuable content here. I hope this little follow-up was helpful, and we'll talk later.